Hello everyone, my name is Helene Renninger and I'm a junior majoring in Management Information Systems, and I am working with Dr. Freeman and Dr. Bott on the application of machine learning techniques to identify non-informative images. This project is one of many under the Sex Trafficking Analytics for Network Detection and Disruption initiative. This initiative aims to develop and refine existing methods for linking and classifying data potentially related to sex trafficking. And so in this, we might use network science, machine learning, or information retrieval techniques. Currently, human trafficking is a very prevalent issue. It is defined as the exploitation and enslavement of humans for profit, and there's an estimated 49.6 million trafficked. The commercial escort sites currently enable this to be a bigger issue because traffickers can use these sites to reach more consumers and victims, and the traffickers can hide their own identities and the identities of victims. Currently, law enforcement lacks the resources to perform analysis on the millions of ads that can be pulled from these sites every single day. And when a site is shut down, traffickers tend to just move to the next biggest site. And these sites are typically hosted in countries where prostitution may be legal. However, they are unable to accurately determine if human trafficking is occurring or control that on the site. And so this is where STAND and their initiative comes in. They do 24/7 data collection through web scraping of 15 active sites, and there are an average of 100,000 ads and 300 images pulled down from these sites every single day. So you can kind of think of an ad as a Craigslist posting. There might be a caption or a subject line. We will be referring to that as the text. There may be an image on the post. There may be multiple images on the post. Similarly, there may be a phone number or multiple phone numbers, and we pull a lot more additional information such as the location, the city, or the state that this person is posting from. So with that in mind, each piece of information can be referred to as a vertex. The vertexes come together to form components. And so we can see on the left, we have two ads that are linked by an identical image and a third ad on the right. So let's say this first component was posted in Washington, and let's say this other component was posted in Pennsylvania, and we just pulled this component down. So if these two components had an identical image, say a Snapchat logo, then they would be linked. But this might strike you as odd since they're from different points in the country. So this is an issue we face oftentimes due to generic data. So when I refer to generic data, I'm speaking more on like logos and memes that are used by people. It may often be a scam post, but this data contributes to a key issue we face in our research called the giant component. And so you can think of all of these posts being linked on identical data, and if we have a lot of generic data, it all becomes interconnected. Kind of think of it as a very complex spider web. And so when all of that data becomes interconnected, it becomes very difficult to pull out individuals that we think may be in these situations. So my goal is to use methods to kind of filter out this generic or non-informative images. So when I say non-informative, I'm referring to an image that may be a logo or a meme, but more specifically, it's digitally illustrated or digitally created. And then on the other hand, we have informative images, and these are images that are a picture taken, a photograph. So in order to filter these images, we will be using transfer learning and a ResNet 50 model. So if you think about your Photos app, typically nowadays you might get recommendations for a folder of your dog. And so your phone is implementing a similar method to kind of recognize these patterns and shapes in your images and group them together. So ResNet 50 is similar. It was trained on 1 million images, and it can classify an image into one of 1,000 categories. So we're going to use transfer learning, which is taking a pre-trained model and training it further on related data. So to walk you through the process, we have this general flowchart. We take the image as input. It will go through multiple layers of learning the shapes and the lines and classifying them into one of 1,000 units. But this isn't our goal. So we're going to extract that layer and replace it to identify if it's one of 2 units. So with that, we retrain this model on 588 informative images and 585 informative images. So once we retrained the model, we applied this to a 90-day set and got the following results. So to take a closer look, we have the giant component vertex reduction. In this result, we would want to see a higher value. We want to reduce the giant component. However, we seem to have received about 1.25% reduction, which is not as much as we were looking for. Next, in these following metrics, we'd want to see smaller values. And so these are metrics that were calculated based off of the new components that were generated by breaking up the giant component. And then we compare them to our benchmark data. And so we compute our benchmark data by looking at what we would expect the data to look like. So going back to our example, let's think about data, and let's say 40% of it is stuck in the giant component. Then in that case, 60% is not the giant component. So kind of looking at that 60%, that will allow us to form a benchmark on what we expect our data to look like. And so we can see that this method performs well in the spatial similarity and text similarity compared versus the giant component reduction didn't prove the results that we needed as much. And so this is why it is only one step in a larger process. We can see in our larger process, we go through multiple different methods, not just generic image filtering. So we construct the giant component, and then we apply text filtering, then image filtering, and then we use graph filtering. So once we use all of these, we are able to come to these combined results. And these results are a lot more of what we would like to see. We have a 13.63% reduction in the giant component, a big increase from what we had before. And then the remaining three metrics, which we, again, want to remain low, are low, if not lower than what we saw in the generic images. So this goes to prove that the combination of these methods proves to be successful. So STAND as a whole has had a really large impact. There are 275 arrests for soliciting, over 64 arrests for traveling to meet with a minor for an unlawful sex act, and over 60 potential victims identified. And this is a limited estimate due to the sensitivity of the situation. So in the future, we are hoping to complete writing, drafting, and reviewing our paper for submission, and then hopefully after that, moving into more methods to further strengthen our process. So thank you. Any questions?
Have you seen an increase in AI-generated images being posted, and how can your model handle that? Is it useful data or not?
So we haven't seen as much as you would think, because if I were a genuine user on this site, I don't want to seem like a scam. And so using an AI-generated photo would deter people from interacting with my posts, and that's the same for someone even acting as a scam, because you would still want someone to interact with your posts. So we don't tend to see a lot of generated pictures, but again, since our model is designed to look for those patterns in the shapes and the lines, depending on how the image was generated, it could still be classified as informative, but even then it might be indicative of some information about the individual, because if you are generating a picture, you maybe want it to look like you. So we're not sure, but it's something to consider.
So when talking about a giant component, do you ever consider like a plural of giant components, like as in maybe there's this one that contains 60%, but the first 10% of components contain 90% of the data, or do you see any behaviors like that with the data as a whole?
I am not sure, but with my research specifically, I don't see a lot of that, but I think if we were able to decompose it to where we can build a better picture of who's an individual and their situation, that would be the best end goal.
So how long does it usually take for the model to predict whether an image is informative or not?
Yeah. So with this model, it is estimated to take about 0.111 seconds to identify one image. So if we're looking at 100,000 images, that could take around 3 hours.
Can you elaborate on informative versus non-informative images?
Yeah. So like I explained earlier, when I refer to informative, I'm thinking about a picture that is taken, like a photograph, a picture that you might take with your phone. And so oftentimes that's a picture of someone's face or maybe a full body picture, but we can see that with those, it would be like a picture taken versus non-informative. It's kind of anything that's excluded by that. So it's typically digitally illustrated or created. So we're thinking logos or memes. And so with those, you might notice there's a lot of the same color, or when it does go color the color, there's a lot of contrast. So it might be detecting patterns like that.